David Brewster here with a new episode of Scales and Tales, and this is Learning Lydian. And I recently put together this special look at the modes from the major scale in the Scales and Tales series, and we started with discovering Dorian. The previous episode was finding Phrygian, and now we've worked our way up to Learning Lydian. Sorry for the ABC 1, 2, 3 titles that I gave these, but I thought they were fitting. But Lydian's a really interesting mode from the major scale. It has a very exotic, flavorful sound. Even though it's very closely related to the major scale, there's really just one note different between Ionian and Lydian, and we're going to talk about that. But this is a very distinct flavor in music, and it really brings to mind certain musicians and players: Frank Zappa, Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, people like John Petrucci. A lot of jazz, a lot of progressive rock, a lot of fusion and stuff uses Lydian tonalities, classical music. So it's definitely out there, and you definitely, you'll notice the sound, the tonality, whether it's a chord or the scale or something like that. And it's ear-catching. Definitely, to me, it's a lot more interesting than just the regular old major scale. So anyway, here we go. Since we're not talking about a specific band or guitarist, we can dive right into the lesson. And this entire episode is going to revolve around C Lydian. So the first thing we need to do here is figure out where C Lydian comes from. We need to find the parent scale. And we've done this in the previous episodes. Discovering Dorian, we were using C Dorian. And in that episode, I told you to count back a whole step from that C note, and that reveals the parent scale. So B flat major right there, kind of births, C Dorian right there, which is the second mode from the major scale. The previous episode was finding Phrygian. We were in E Phrygian, and in that episode I told you to count back 2 whole steps from that E note to find the parent scale. E to D, and then D to C. So E Phrygian comes from C major, or C Ionian. So now we're tackling Lydian. And we could do that same counting down, on a single string that we did in the previous episodes. But there's a trick that I like to use for Lydian. So we need C Lydian, right? So let's locate the root note we need on the A string. So we can find C right there on the 3rd fret on the A. And then all you have to do is just move to the low E string, and that adjacent note is your parent scale, or parent, from where C Lydian came from. So C Lydian comes from G, or G major, right there. So here's C Lydian. And then right next door is G, which is where it comes from. And here's G Ionian, the exact same notes, just starting on G. So, G to G, that's G Ionian. And then you do the exact same scale, but start on C and do C to C, and that's C Lydian. And we kind of did this in the previous episodes. Just remember, whatever key you need Lydian in, find that note and then move to the low E string and find that adjacent note, and that's showing you where the parent scale is. So C Lydian comes from G major right there. All right, with the opening jam, I was basically just playing over a 2-chord progression that I loop with a TC Electronic Ditto looper. Let me explain those chords first, and I'll kind of give you some insight as far as what I was playing. But the chords I was playing over, the first one's like this. All right, so that's basically a C major, C major 9 sharp 11. Totally a Lydian-flavored chord, big time. Make sense of that, just think of a C major bar chord, get rid of the bar chord and play the top 2 strings open. So it's C major 7 basically. And then we're going to remove these 2 notes, your pinky and your middle finger, and that's going to reconfigure up here. So you're grabbing this D and that F sharp right there. Like that. So there's your 9 because it's a C major 9. And then that F sharp with your 3rd finger, that's your sharp 11 right there. That's the Lydian note. Flavored chords and Lydian scales basically have a raised 4th or a raised 11, sharp 4, sharp 11, and that totally hits it right there. And then the root note changed, and I just opened up that low E string and kept everything else the same. Right, and that's an E minor 9. So it's interesting that the chord pretty much remained the same, just the root note changed. Thing that's interesting is the scale does the exact same thing. So here's C Lydian right here. Right, over that C major 9 sharp 11. And then when the chord changes to that E minor 9, I basically locked into the same scale, but I started targeting E instead of C. And when you do that, that should definitely ring a bell over E. That's basically E Aeolian or E natural minor. So it's, interesting right here. C Lydian and E Aeolian share the exact same notes. It's just the emphasis on the root note. Over C, it sounds like C Lydian. And over that E minor 9, it sounds like E Aeolian. Now for a great melodic example using Lydian, check out Yoda's Theme from the Empire Strikes Back soundtrack by John Williams. And Yoda's Theme is literally in C Lydian. It actually drifts between C Lydian and C Ionian, the regular major scale, like this. Lydian and then also C Ionian too, but right there, right, and he's targeting that sharp 11 right there, that F sharp, right, and then do that again, and right here he targets the regular F, so it goes back to Ionian, and there he's targeting the regular F to that E too. So it's just a sample of Lydian kind of drifting into Ionian. Like that. Next I'm going to serve up some Lydian-flavored chords, and this is really going to help you bring out the tonality and sound of the scale. And we're going to start way down here in open position with just a basic C major 7 right there. So just grab that C and E, the G, B, and high E are open. There's C major 7. And that will sound, correct for Lydian, technically. But we're missing that raised 4th of that sharp 11 in there. So let's just basically stick that F sharp way up on top. So now we're going to replace that high E open with that F sharp. There's C major 7 sharp 11, like that. that spacey or that airy, you know, C major 7, they just threw an F sharp way up on top. That's totally Lydian approved. We could also add that F sharp right here, so we could replace this E, keep the high E open, and then just play F sharp there on the D string. Exact same chord, C major 7, sharp 11. We could play it like this. You could play it like that. You could actually use both of those F sharps. You can just kick that E out of there, and now that's a C major 7, sharp 11 with no third. Right? But totally, you know, Lydian-flavored. You know, totally. Right? Really cool. Let's get away from open position. Let's look at, you know, this C major bar chord. Lift up the top 2 strings open. That's C major 7 played like that. All right, and this is taking us back to that opening kind of jam chord like that. That E major 9 sharp 11. Right, like that. We could play around, you know, like this. We could grab the C root note there. We can grab this B, grab the F sharp there. Use the open G and open high E like that. Really cool, like modern sounding chord. And that's a C major 7, sharp 11. Now we can replace this open G with that E note, and that's still C major 7, sharp 11. Like that. You may have noticed, like during the opening jam, I was playing, you know, this little 2-note chord, and I was also adding harmonics on top. Like that. That's still, you know, C major 7, sharp 11 implied like that. Really interesting. I'm a big fan of adding harmonics with fretted notes for chords. Think of Steve Vai and some players like that. And there's a ton of examples of this. You know, we could actually bar, you know, that C major 7, sharp 11 I was playing with earlier for the opening jam. You know, we could actually apply the bar right there. That's a very common Petrucci chord for sure. That's Petrucci's Lydian chord right there. We could extend down here like this. You know, think of like a C sus2, like the stretch power chord, like that. But we could basically lay your pinky down, grab that F sharp on the B string. Now that's a C sus2, sharp 11 right there. Flavors of chords will bring out that tonality and sound of Lydian. Right, up next we're going to hit some C Lydian scale fingerings and, you know, scale positions. And this is something I like to work on with my students, especially when they're working on, you know, scales and positions on the fretboard. And it really opens up your fretboard big time. So let's start with C Lydian right here. Just a little 1-octave pocket right there. There's your C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, and there's C Lydian. Now let's basically use that same root note, but let's play it like this. So kind of choose your own adventure there. You could do it here. You could do it right here. Now if we move the C root note to the low E string, we can open up this shape. That's kind of interesting because you've got this whole step, you know, thing happening right there. Now if we basically start right here, it's going to mimic what we had, you know, on the A string right here. But now we're starting on the low E string, so the same fingering right there. And then the exact same thing right here is going to happen. It's kind of reoccurring what we had right there. We can basically reapply that to the low E string. So we just kind of mapped out, like, you know, some different fingerings off the A string and also the low E string, and you could expand this. You know, you could move it up here. And then grab that C, and then you could start kind of playing with those shapes and forms. You could start on this C right here. And you're just basically learning, different ways of navigating through that scale and different string groups and different positions on the fretboard, and I highly recommend that. Learn, you know, 1 octave of the scale and then see how many different places on the fretboard you can play that 1 octave C Lydian. All right, last but not least, I'm going to direct you toward a very famous Lydian-flavored song for you to kind of experiment and jam with and kind of play around with a little bit. And there's some obvious choices I could have made. I was listening to some Dream Theater and almost selected something from them. Also, the really obvious choices would be Crushing Day or Flying in a Blue Dream from Joe Satriani. Those are very well-known, Lydian-flavored vehicles. But this is going to be Inca Rhodes from Frank Zappa, and this is from One Size Fits All from 1975. Very famous Lydian song for sure. And it's a very strange song, of course. And I'm basically targeting like the dreamy part when it kind of kicks back a little bit. Not so much the crazy xylophone, area in the beginning, but pretty much right around 2 minutes into the song, you're going to hear this kick back, lazy. Actually, the guitar's not playing that. That's a composite, kind of arrangement. The bass, the keys, the horns, everything's kind of implying this chord progression, and then Frank's playing a solo. I think he's using like a Mutron or something in there. Has a crazy, envelope filter going. But that first chord, that's, should look familiar. That's C major 7 sharp 11 once again. And the second chord is like that. It's like a D add 11. Just think of like a cowboy C major chord up a whole step, and don't play the low E or high E. D add 11 like that. And that's kind of what I'm playing with because, technically in this Lydian progression, we're really playing with C major 7 and D7. Okay? But we're not doing it like that. That's not Frank Zappa style because that's way too plain for somebody like Frank Zappa. Just stock chords. Of course, he's got to do something weird in there. So you got to get the sharp 11 in there, which is right there. And then for the change, to D7, it just didn't sound spacey enough to my ears. That's why I opted for that D at 11. Get a little more spacey kind of sound. So I'm just going to loop this progression back and forth with TC Electronic Did a Looper and just jam a little bit. I'm not actually playing Inca Rhodes. I'm just playing around with that chord progression from Inca Rhodes using C Lydian like this. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Scales and Tales with Learning Lydian. Definitely a very familiar and popular sound heard in music, especially if you listen to some of the musicians and players we've talked about in this episode. Steve Vai and Joe Satriani, of course, Frank Zappa. You start listening to film soundtracks. There's a lot more than just Yoda's theme that uses, Lydian as far as movies and films. Check out the soundtrack from E.T. and Back to the Future and some of those soundtracks, and you'll hear more Lydian in action. But it's definitely a very usable and a very interesting scale. It's also eye-opening to notice that there's only one note difference between the major scale or Ionian and the Lydian mode. It's that fourth. And that's really interesting that one note has that much power to kind of shift the tonality and sound of the seemingly boring Ionian or major scale to this futuristic, modern-sounding, Lydian mode, which is very inspiring. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Nail Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.